The night was darker than usual, as though the sky had swallowed every last flicker of light and left only the faint glow of street lamps scattered along the empty city streets. Snow drifted down in soft, endless sheets, covering the pavement in a cold white blanket, each flake muffled sound, making the world eerily silent. It was the kind of silence that reminded Ethan why he hated walking alone. His polished shoes left crisp imprints behind him, but no one was there to notice. No one ever was to the world. Ethan was a man who had it all, a millionaire, successful, dressed in the sharpness of wealth that glittered under the city lights. His overcoat was tailored. His watch gleamed with quiet arrogance. His presence commanded respect in every boardroom. Yet beneath all of it, his life was hollow. He had mansions filled with paintings, but no laughter echoing through the halls. Cars that could reach impossible speeds, but no one to ride beside him. Loneliness followed him like his shadow, a constant reminder that wealth could buy comfort, but never warmth. He had almost convinced himself that he was fine with it, almost. Until tonight, he was passing under a flickering street lamp when he saw movement small, fragile, barely more than a shadow pressed against the trunk of a tree. At first, he thought it was nothing more than the storm playing tricks, but then he heard it, a soft, broken sound carried by the wind. So faint he might have missed it if the world hadn't been so silent. A little girl, no older than 6, sat, trembling against the rough bark. Her thin dress was soaked, her knees pulled tightly to her chest as though she could shield herself from the cold. In her arms, she clutched a teddy bear, its fur worn down to threads, one button eye missing. She shivered violently, her lips moving in a desperate whisper. "Please, don't hurt us." Ethan froze. The words, fragile as falling snow, pierced through the armor he had built around himself. Us. She had said us. His pale blue eyes searched the shadows instinctively. But there was no one else in sight. No mother, no father, no protector, only this small figure, curled in fear against the night. Something cracked inside him. For years, he had lived as though nothing could reach him. Not grief, not joy, not love. He had closed himself off, convinced that caring led only to pain. But here, in the stillness of snow and silence, a child's trembling plea shattered everything. He wasn't staring at poverty or tragedy or some problem to be solved with a check. He was staring at a pair of wide eyes glistening with tears. A soul far too young to carry such terror. His instincts whispered for him to walk away. This wasn't his world. He didn't know her anything, but his feet didn't move. For the first time in years, he felt something real, a pull stronger than logic, deeper than fear. It wasn't pity, it was an obligation. It was something he couldn't name yet, but it felt like purpose. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped closer. The snow crunched beneath his shoes, each sound loud in the fragile quiet. Her eyes snapped to him, wide and afraid, her body pressing harder against the tree. She clutched the teddy bear tighter, as if it alone could shield her from the world. Ethan crouched, lowering himself so he didn't tower above her. His breath rose in pale clouds between them. "I won't hurt you," he said softly, the words unfamiliar on his tongue. He hadn't spoken with gentleness in years, but the moment demanded nothing less. The girl's lips trembled, her voice breaking as she whispered again, "Please, don't hurt us." Ethan's chest tightened. Whoever she was, whatever had driven her to hide here in the freezing dark, she wasn't alone in her fear. There was someone else she was protecting, someone unseen, someone she refused to betray even in terror. And that thought that a child would carry such responsibility cut him deeper than anything ever had. He realized, standing in the falling snow, that his life of silence and wealth meant nothing compared to this moment. This wasn't business. This wasn't power. This was human, raw, fragile, and for reasons he couldn't explain. He knew one thing with absolute certainty. He couldn't walk away, not tonight. Not from her, not from the whisper that had cracked open his heart. Asterisk, the snow had not stopped falling, but now it seemed thicker, heavier, as if the world itself was trying to bury every sound, every trace of what had just happened under that lonely tree. Ethan stood frozen for a moment, his breath sharp in the cold air, his eyes locked on the little girl. Her small hands clutched the teddy bear as though it were the only anchor, keeping her from vanishing into the storm. Her voice, fragile and trembling, echoed in his ears. "Don't hurt us." He lowered himself slowly, careful not to startle her, though she flinched at even the slightest movement. Her eyes darted to the shadows around them, searching, fearful, expecting someone or something to step out of the dark. That single word she had whispered, us, lingered in Ethan's mind like a riddle. Who was us? Where was the other? And why did the child look as though she had seen a monster lurking in every corner? Are you alone? He asked quietly, though part of him already knew the answer. Her lips parted, but she didn't answer right away. Instead, she hugged the Teddy closer, her shoulders trembling. Finally, in a voice so faint he had to lean forward to hear it, she whispered, "My mom. She's sick. She couldn't get up tonight. I was looking for food." Ethan's chest tightened. She was 6, maybe 7 at most, and here she was wandering the frozen streets, carrying the weight of survival on her tiny shoulders. His mind screamed at him to question further, to press for details. But one look at her wide, terrified eyes stopped him. This wasn't a boardroom negotiation. This was trust, fragile, uncertain, but forming in the frozen space between them. The wind howled through the alley, and Ethan removed his scarf, wrapping it gently around her neck. She gasped at the sudden warmth, her small fingers brushing against the fine wool as though she had never touched something so soft. For a moment, her eyes lifted to his, and he saw something flicker there, not just fear, but hope. "Better?" he asked softly. She nodded, barely, but then her gaze shifted past him, toward the darkness at the end of the street. Her small body stiffened. "He's watching," she whispered, so quietly it was almost lost to the wind. Ethan turned, his sharp blue eyes narrowing into the shadows. The street lay empty, the snow covering everything in silence. No movement, no figure. Yet the certainty in the child's voice unsettled him. She wasn't imagining things, he could see it in the way her body trembled, the way she held her teddy bear like a shield. Someone had put that fear inside her, and fear like that didn't come from nothing. His instincts told him to get her out of the open, to find warmth and shelter before asking more. He stood and extended his hand. "Come with me, you'll be safe." For a heartbeat, she hesitated. Trust was not easy for her, not after what she had seen, not after what she had endured. But then, slowly, she placed her small hand in his. Her fingers were ice cold, her grip weak, but it was there, and that touch, it did something to him. Something he hadn't felt in years. As they walked through the snow, her small steps trying to keep pace with his, Ethan felt the weight of eyes on them. He scanned the streets, the rooftops, the empty alleys, but saw nothing. Still, his instinct screamed that the girl was right. Someone was out there, lurking, waiting. They reached a small cafe still lit against the storm. Ethan led her inside, the warmth of the room wrapping around them like a blanket. He bought the hot chocolates, the steam curling upward like fragile smoke. The girl held her cup in both hands, staring into it as if it contained the answers to everything she had lost. "You don't have to talk," Ethan said gently. "Not until you're ready, but you're safe here." Her lips trembled. She whispered, "If we tell anyone, they'll take my mom away." He said so. He said no one would believe us. Ethan's hands clenched. He had heard threats in business, seen rivals use intimidation, but this was different. This was cruelty aimed at a child, and it made his blood boil. "Your mom," he said carefully. "She's still with you, right?" "Yes," the girl whispered, "but she's sick. If he finds us, he'll hurt her." Her words hit him harder than he expected. She wasn't asking him to save her. She was begging him to save her mother. A child who should have been worried about dolls and bedtime stories was instead carrying the burden of protection. Ethan looked at her, at the trembling hands, the thin frame, the eyes that carried more sorrow than most adults could bear, and something inside him shifted. For years, he had thought loneliness was the worst fate, but now he realized there was something worse, being too small to fight back, and yet forced to stand in the storm anyway. He reached across the table, his voice steady but low. "What's your name, Lily?" she whispered. "Lily," he repeated, as though the name itself carried weight. "No one is going to hurt you. Not while I'm here." For the first time, she looked directly at him, suspicion and hope warring in her eyes. And though Ethan had no idea who the shadow in the distance was, or why this little girl had been left to beg the night not to hurt her, he made a silent vow in that cafe, no matter the cost, no matter the danger, he would not let the shadows win. The snow outside fell heavier now, blanketing the city, erasing tracks, covering paths. And yet inside, beneath the fragile glow of warm light and the steady heartbeat of new trust, something powerful had begun. A bond, a promise, a spark of defiance against the darkness. And Ethan knew, deep in his chest, that this was only the beginning. The cafe's warmth lingered like a fragile shield against the night, but Ethan knew it wouldn't last. Lily's eyes kept darting toward the frosted window as though the snow itself might part and reveal the shadows she feared. She sipped her hot chocolate carefully, the steam fogging her face. But her little hands trembled so violently that droplets spilled onto the table. She clutched her teddy tighter with her free arm, pressing it into her chest as though it could muffle the fear crawling inside her. Ethan sat across from her, silent. In business meetings, silence was a weapon he wielded with precision. Here, it was something different. He didn't want to press her, didn't want to force fragile words out of a throat. Already tight with fear, he waited, watching the storm. Outside, every sense sharpened. And then he felt an instinct that had carried him through countless deals. The air shifted. Someone was out there. He glanced at Lily. She had noticed too. Her shoulders stiffened. Her breathing quickened. Her small lips moved soundlessly. He's here. Ethan stood, straightened his coat, and held out his hand. Come on. We can't stay here. Her eyes widened, but she obeyed. Sliding off the chair and slipping her tiny hand into his, they stepped back into the storm. The cold bit instantly, a sharp reminder that safety was still far away. Snowflakes clung to Lily's hair as she held tight to him, her steps stumbling but determined. They moved quickly through the narrow streets, away from the cafe's soft glow. The world outside was darker now, shadows stretching long beneath. The street lamps, every sound seemed louder, the crunch of their feet on snow. The howl of the wind between buildings, the distant creak of something shifting in the dark. Ethan turned into a narrow alley, his instincts telling him they needed cover. The alley was narrow, walled in by brick and dim light, the kind of place most men would avoid after dark. But he had no choice. He crouched to face Lily, brushing snow from her shoulder. Stay behind me, no matter what. Understand? She nodded quickly, fear etched in every line of her face. Her teddy bear dangled from her arm, soaked with snow, but she clung to it anyway. Then the sound came, footsteps, soft at first, but deliberate, crunching over snow with measured weight. Ethan's head lifted sharply, his eyes narrowing toward the alley entrance. Out of the storm stepped a figure tall, broad, wrapped in a heavy coat. His face shadowed beneath a hat. Lily gasped, clutching Ethan's coat with both hands. It's him, she whispered, terror breaking her voice. The man stopped a few feet away, his gaze flicking from Ethan to Lily. A sneer tugged at the corner of his lips. Thought you could run forever, huh? His voice was gravel, low and threatening. Ethan's jaw clenched. He had faced rivals who threatened his fortune, men who could collapse his empire with a single signature. But none of them had looked at him the way this man did, like prey. And none had ever made a child tremble the way Lily was trembling. Now, leave, Ethan said firmly, his voice calm, but edged with steel. You don't want to do this. The man chuckled darkly, the sound echoing in the alley. And who are you? Some savior in a suit. She belongs to me, Lily whimpered, burying her face against Ethan's side. Ethan's blood burned hot. Belongs? The word cut like ice. He stepped forward, placing himself fully between Lily and the man, his broad frame shoving her completely. Not tonight, he said, his voice low. Dangerous. The man's expression hardened. He took another step forward, shoulders tense, eyes sharp. The snow fell harder now, spinning between them like sparks before fire. Ethan's pulse thundered, but his voice remained steady. If you want her, you'll have to go through me. For a long, heavy moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the hiss of the storm. Lily's small hand clutched Ethan's coat, her trust fragile, but absolute. Ethan felt at her belief that he could protect her, and for the first time in his life, he believed it too. The man's sneer faltered. He studied Ethan's eyes, searching for weakness, but found none. With a curse, he spat into the snow and stepped back into the shadows. This isn't over, he growled before disappearing into the storm. Ethan stood frozen for a moment, his breath sharp in the cold. He didn't move until the last echo of footsteps faded into silence. Then he exhaled, realizing his hands were shaking not from fear, but from rage. Rage at the man, rage at the cruelty that left a child to face such horrors. Lily looked up at him, eyes wet, her lip trembling. You didn't let him hurt us, she whispered. Ethan knelt, brushing the snow from her cheek with a gloved hand. "I won't, ever," and in that promise, spoken under the flickering glow of a street lamp, in a frozen alley, something shifted. This wasn't about wealth or loneliness anymore. It wasn't about who Ethan had been or what he had built. It was about this moment, this child, this fragile trust that had somehow become the most important thing in his life. But deep in his chest, he knew the man's words were true. This wasn't over. Not by far. Asterisk, the night seemed to grow colder. After the man disappeared into the storm, Ethan knew it wasn't just the wind cutting through the alley, it was a heaviness of what lingered behind. Lily clung to his coat, her small frame trembling as though the encounter had stolen what little strength she had left. He lifted her gently into his arms, her teddy bear still pressed between them, and began walking. Every step left sharp imprints in the snow, but in his mind, all he could think about was how fragile her trust was and how easily it could shatter. If he failed, the streets were nearly deserted, only the occasional flicker of headlights passing on distant roads. The city had wrapped itself in silence, a silence that made every sound behind them sharper, every shift in the shadows more dangerous. Ethan's instincts screamed that they were still being watched, that the man or others were not done. With them, he had built his life on instinct, reading opponents in boardrooms and anticipating moves before they happened. But this was different. This wasn't money. This wasn't power. This was survival. He spotted a brick building tucked behind rows of closed shops. Its windows glowed with warm light, faint music playing inside, a shelter, the kind of place he had driven past countless times without a second thought. Tonight, it felt like the only place in the world that mattered. Almost there, he murmured to Lily, though he wasn't sure if the words were meant to comfort her or steady himself. Inside, the contrast was striking. He greeted them, along with the smell of soup and the murmur of tired voices. Volunteers moved between cots and tables, offering blankets, smiles, and warm meals. Lily blinked against the sudden light, her eyes wide. For the first time, her grip loosened just slightly on his coat. A woman in her 50s, wearing a faded sweater and a smile that seemed carved from resilience, approached them. "You're freezing," she said, her eyes softening when they landed on Lily. "Come, let's get her warm." Ethan hesitated. He wasn't used to handing anything or anyone over, but Lily nodded faintly, as if sensing she was safe here. Together, they guided her to a corner where a blanket was wrapped around her thin shoulders. She held her teddy bear tightly beneath it, her small body finally stilling. Ethan stayed close, his eyes scanning the room. He had built empires from nothing, but for the first time in his life, he felt powerless. He couldn't sign a paper or wire money to erase the shadows that haunted this child. He could only be present, and it terrified him more than any deal ever had. When Lily finally began to sip the soup placed before her, Ethan sat beside her. His voice was calm, steady, though his chest ached with each word. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. Whoever that man is, he won't touch you again." Lily's spoon clattered softly against the bowl. She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering. "He said, if we told anyone, they'd take my mom away. He said no one would believe us." The words struck him like a knife, shame and fear, planted into the heart of a child. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just a predator, he was a manipulator, one who thrived on silence. Ethan clenched his fists beneath the table, forcing his voice to stay calm. "Your mom, she's sick, isn't she?" Lily nodded. "She tries to hide it, but she can't always stand. She works too hard. She tells me not to worry, but I know, and he knows too." Ethan's pulse quickened. There was the leverage. Whoever this man was, he used the mother's weakness as a chain to control them both, and Lily, too young to fight back, had carried that fear like armor. Ethan leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Do you trust me, Lily?" Her lips trembled. She looked at him for a long moment, studying his face the way children do when they want to believe but fear betrayal. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Yes, I think so." Ethan exhaled, relief mixing with an unshakable resolve. Trust was fragile, and he wouldn't break it, not ever. Hours passed. Lily eventually drifted to sleep on a small cot, her teddy bear curled against her chest. Ethan sat nearby, his back straight, his eyes never leaving the entrance. He couldn't relax, not with the echo of that man's sneer in his ears, not with the knowledge that danger still lingered outside. And then it came. A sound outside the shelter, soft at first, then deliberate, the crunch of footsteps in the snow. Ethan's body tensed instantly. He rose, moving to the frosted window, through the glass. Faint shapes shifted in the darkness to figures this time, not one. Waiting. Watching die, he turned back toward Lily, asleep and fragile, unaware of the storm still circling them. A wave of something fierce swept through him, not just anger, not just fear, but something deeper, a purpose he hadn't known he was capable of. He had built his life alone, convinced that solitude was safer. But tonight, looking at Lily and thinking of her sick mother waiting somewhere in the shadows, he knew solitude was no longer an option. These two lives were tied to him now, and if the world wanted to harm them, it would have to face him first. As snow continued to fall outside, Ethan stood guard by the window, his heart heavy and his mind sharp. Secrets lingered, shadows waited, and he knew with absolute certainty the night's dangers were far from over. The storm had calmed by morning, but the silence it left behind was heavier than the night itself. Snow lay deep over the city, clean on the surface yet hiding what had happened beneath. Inside the shelter, light filtered through frosted windows, painting the room in a muted glow. Lily stirred on her cot, her small hands still clutching the teddy bear, her face soft in sleep. For the first time since Ethan had found her, her breathing was steady, unbroken by fear. Ethan had not slept. He had sat by the window all night, eyes scanning the snow-laden streets, body taut as a wire. Twice, he thought he had seen movement, beyond the glass shadows lingering the lawn before vanishing into the storm. He knew the danger wasn't gone. It was waiting, watching when Lily finally blinked awake, rubbing her eyes with the back of her hand. Her first words weren't about herself. "My mom," she whispered, her voice small but urgent. "She needs me." The sentence cracked something in Ethan all over again. A child her age should have woken asking for breakfast, not worrying about a mother too sick to move. He crouched beside her, lowering his voice. "Where is she?" Lily hesitated. Fear flickered across her face. "I shouldn't tell," he said. "If I tell, he'll find us." Ethan held her gaze, steady and unyielding. "Lily, he won't touch you. Not now. Not ever. I promise. If your mother is out there, we need to get her safe. Will you show me?" She studied him for a long time, her wide eyes searching his face for cracks, for lies. Finally, she nodded. "Yes, but we have to hurry." They set out together, bundled in borrowed coats from the shelter. Lily led him through winding streets, her small boots crunching in the snow. Every step seemed heavy for her, yet she pressed forward with determination. Ethan stayed close, his eyes constantly scanning alleys and rooftops. At last, she stopped before a crumbling apartment building. On the edge of the district, the paint was peeling, the windows broken, the front door half hanging on its hinges. It looked abandoned, forgotten by the city, but Lily tugged his sleeve, pointing upward. "She's there." They climbed narrow stairs that creaked under there. "Wait." At the top floor, Lily stopped at a door with peeling numbers. She knocked softly. 3 quick taps. For a moment, there was only silence. Then came the sound of shuffling inside, followed by a cough, weak, dry, but alive. The door creaked. Open. A woman stood there, wrapped in a thin blanket, her face pale, her body frail. Her eyes widened at the sight of Lily, then filled with tears as she pulled her daughter into her arms. "My baby," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I thought I lost you." Ethan stepped back, letting them embrace, but as he watched, his stomach twisted. The woman looked far too sick to stand, her hands trembling even as she held Lily close. This wasn't just exhaustion, this was illness that had gone untreated for far too long. When her gaze finally lifted to Ethan, suspicion flickered there. "Who are you?" "A friend," Ethan said softly. "She was out in the storm, alone. I couldn't." He stopped, the words choking in his throat. "I couldn't leave her there." The woman's eyes softened, but her shoulders slumped with shame. She turned away, coughing violently, clutching the wall for support. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "He'll find us now. He always does." Ethan's chest burned. Who is he? Her silence was louder than an answer. She sank onto a worn mattress on the floor, pulling Lily close again. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she finally spoke, her voice trembling. "He said he owned us. After my husband died, we had nothing. No money, no family. He offered work, food, a place to stay, but it wasn't kindness, it was a trap." Every day he reminded me that I owed him. Every day he reminded Lily that if we ran, he'd make sure no one would believe us, that they'd take her away from me forever. Ethan's fist clenched. He had spent his life surrounded by ruthless men who built empires on exploitation. But hearing it laid bare like this from a woman too weak to stand, from a child who whispered, "Don't hurt us," and the night ignited something deeper than rage. It was shame. He had lived in comfort while people like this were crushed in shadows his wealth never illuminated. "I have resources," Ethan said, his voice steady but edged with resolve. "Doctors, lawyers, security, whatever. You need I can protect you both." The woman shook her head, her eyes filling again. "You don't understand. It's not just him. He has people everywhere. Money, power. We've tried to run before. He always finds us." Ethan knelt in front of her, his blue eyes fierce. "Not this time. Not with me." The room fell silent. Lily looked between them, her tiny hands clutching both her teddy bear and her mother's arm. In that fragile moment, Ethan realized the truth. This wasn't about pity or obligation, or even anger at the man who hunted them. This was about responsibility his. If he walked away now, they would vanish back into the shadows, and he couldn't let that happen. As he sat in that broken apartment, surrounded by peeling walls and the quiet sobs of a mother and daughter, Ethan made a vow, one he hadn't made in years. He would not rest until they were safe, no matter what it cost, no matter who stood in his way. Outside, the snow began again, falling soft and relentless, covering the city in white. But Ethan's heart burned hotter than ever, because now he had a war to fight. After snow fell again the next night, heavy and unyielding, turning the city into a white labyrinth where danger could hide in every corner. Ethan sat in the back seat of his car, its heater humming softly, but there was no warmth inside him. His driver watched the road, silent, while Ethan stared at his own reflection in the window. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about mergers or profits. He was thinking about a frail woman coughing on a broken mattress, and a little girl clutching a teddy bear with more courage than anyone her age should ever have needed. Lily's mother slept under medical supervision. Now Ethan had made sure of it. A team of doctors was already on rotation at the shelter, her prescriptions filled and her meals prepared. It was the first time in months she had seen medicine, yet the shadow of fear had not left her eyes. It wouldn't, not while the man she spoke of still walked free. Ethan knew money could buy treatment, but it could not erase terror. To do that, he would need something more dangerous. He leaned forward. "Take me to my office." It was well past midnight when he arrived at the steel and glass tower that bore his name. The lobby was empty, but the hum of lights and the faint click of security echoed like whispers in the vast space. His empire looked invincible on the surface, yet for the first time, Ethan realized how hollow it felt compared to the fragile warmth of Lily's trust. He rode the elevator to the top floor, the city sprawling beneath him like a frozen chessboard. Inside his office, he called his head of security, a man named Carter, whose years in military intelligence had made him both cautious and ruthless. Carter's gravelly voice crackled through the speaker. "You're saying a child and her mother are being hunted by someone with influence. Who?" "Asterisk, that's what I need you to find out," Ethan replied. His tone was sharp, clipped, but beneath it lay something Carter had never heard in him before: urgency. "I want names, movements, connections. I want to know where he sleeps, what he eats, who pays him. I want him exposed." There was silence on the other end, then a low whistle. "Sounds personal." Ethan's jaw tightened. "It is, within hours," Carter returned with files thick, damning, ugly. Ethan spread them across his desk, his pale blue eyes scanning page after page. The man who had terrorized Lily and her mother was not just a predator. He was a parasite who had built his own small empire in the shadows, exploiting the vulnerable, feeding on their fear. He ran an underground network of debt traps, shelters that weren't shelters, jobs that weren't jobs. And buried in the details was something that made Ethan's blood run cold. At some point, years ago, his own corporation had unknowingly funded one of the shell companies that lined this man's pockets. The shame hit like ice water. He had been blind, too busy chasing expansions and numbers to see the rot festering in the cracks of his empire. And now, a little girl had begged him not to hurt her because in some twisted way, he already had died. By morning, Ethan had mobilized more than money. He hired investigators, lawyers, and a private protection team whose sole mission was to keep Lily and her mother safe. Security cameras were installed in the shelter and at the apartment. Cars followed them quietly, always watching for danger. It was a fortress of protection, but fortresses invited siege, and soon the retaliation came. 2 nights later, while Ethan escorted Lily from the shelter to his car, a brick shattered against the sidewalk, inches from where she walked. She screamed, clutching his arm, as another crashed against the hood. From the shadows, laughter echoed before fading into the storm. His security rushed, but the attackers melted into the night, leaving behind only threats scrawled in paint. On the wall, "She belongs to us." Ethan held Lily close, his heart pounding with fury. This wasn't business strategy. This was war. He doubled security, moved Lily and her mother into one of his private residences high above the city. He thought the height, the locked doors, the armed guards would give him peace, but each time, Lily clung to her teddy bear and whispered, "Is he coming tonight?" Ethan felt the truth sink deeper. Protection came at a cost, and sometimes even walls couldn't keep the darkness out. Days blurred into weeks. The mother's health improved slowly. Though her spirit remained shadowed by years of fear, Lily grew braver, sometimes laughing, sometimes daring to play in the halls, and each time her laughter rang out. Ethan felt something inside him soften and then sharpen. He wanted to protect that sound at any cost. But Carter brought news one evening that struck him like a blow. The man wasn't just threatening Lily and her mother. He had files, records, evidence of his hold over dozens of families, all tied in some way to corporations Ethan had once brushed hands with. Ethan's wealth had built walls, but those walls had let shadows breed. "You want to save one girl, one mother?" Carter asked, his voice blunt. "Fine, but this won't stop with them. You're not fighting one man, Ethan. You're fighting the reflection of everything men like you ignored." Ethan stared out at the snow-cloaked city, Lily's small laughter echoing faintly down the hall. Carter was right. This was bigger than one rescue. This was redemption. And as night settled once more, Ethan made a choice. He would not just protect Lily and her mother. He would burn the rot out of the city itself, even if it meant tearing apart the empire he had built. The cost of protection, he realized, was everything he thought he valued. And for the first time in his life, he was ready to pay it. After snow fell. Like ash on the night of reckoning, Ethan stood at the window of his penthouse. The city stretched out beneath him, glittering and cold. He had thought height meant safety, that walls of glass and steel could hold the darkness back. But fear had followed them even here. Lily's laughter still echoed in the hallways sometimes. But it was softer now, tinged with the knowledge that monsters didn't vanish just because you wished them away. Her mother's health had improved under the care of Ethan's doctors, but her eyes haunted. Apologetic, never quite let go of the past. And Ethan himself, he had changed. He was no longer the man who measured life in profits and stock tickers. He was something else now, though he wasn't sure yet if it was enough. That night, Carter entered his office with a file in hand, his jaw tight. "You need to see this," he said, laying the folder on the desk. Ethan opened it, his pale blue eyes scanning the pages. Bank statements, contracts, transactions. The name of the man who had terrorized Lily and her mother was there. But beneath it, buried in the fine print, were signatures, seals, and company logos Ethan recognized all too well. His own. For a moment, the room spun. His chest tightened, his hands clenched the paper so hard it tore. "No," he muttered, his voice raw. "I didn't know. I didn't." But the truth stared back at him in black ink. Years ago, one of his subsidiaries had invested in a housing development, a clean deal on paper. He hadn't known it was a shell, a front. That money had been siphoned into the hands of predators like the man who hunted Lily. His wealth had not just overlooked the rot that had fed it. Carter's voice was quiet, but firm. "You wanted a shocking truth. Here it is. You built the fortress he used to trap them." Ethan staggered back from the desk, his breath sharp in the cold air. All at once, Lily's trembling whispers echoed in his memory. "Please don't hurt. U.S." The words had haunted him, but now they cut deeper, because in a way he hadn't seen. He had hurt them long before he ever found her under that tree. His empire had made him blind, and his blindness had cost children their innocence, mothers their hope. He pressed a hand to his face, grief tearing through him. He had saved them from the storm, from the alley, from the shadow that stalked them. But the truth was worse. He had been part of the storm all along. Behind him, The door creaked. Lily stood there, her teddy bear dangling from one arm, her eyes wide. She had heard. He saw it in her face. Is it true? She asked softly, her voice shaking. You helped him? The question broke him. He dropped to his knees before her, his polished suit crumpling on the marble floor. I didn't know, Lily. I swear I didn't know. But ignorance isn't an excuse. I should have seen. I should have stopped it. His voice cracked. I can't erase what I've done. But I promise you I will never let it happen again. Not to you. Not to anyone. Tears welled in her eyes, her small fingers tightening around the bear. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she stepped closer and touched his shoulder. Then don't promise me, she whispered. Promise her. Ethan turned. Lily's mother stood in the doorway, frail but steady, her gaze locked on him. In her eyes he saw exhaustion, sorrow, and something more, judgment tempered by the faintest spark of hope. I can't forgive what I don't understand, she said quietly. But if you mean what you say, if you want to make this right, then fight for the others. Fight for every family he hurt. Tear down what you built and rebuild it so no child ever has to beg again. The weight of her words pressed on him like the snow outside. Heavy, suffocating. But for the first time, Ethan didn't want to escape the weight. He wanted to carry it. He rose to his feet, his eyes burning with a resolve sharper than any he had known in business. Then that's what I'll do, he said. Not for profit, not for power, for you, for her. For every child who whispered in the dark, and he did. The next weeks became a storm of revelations. Ethan dismantled the shell companies, exposed the network, poured his fortune into building safe havens where exploitation couldn't hide. He faced the public with the truth, his truth, and though his empire trembled, he stood tall. He let the world see his shame, because only then could it see his change. But none of it mattered more than the moment Lily sat beside him one evening, her head resting against his arm, her teddy bear tucked between them. You didn't walk away, she whispered. No, he said, his voice steady. I never will. The snow still fell outside, covering the city in white, but it no longer felt like silence. It felt like beginning. And as Ethan looked at Lily and her mother, he realized the shocking truth wasn't just that he had once been part of the problem. The greater truth was this: they had saved him too. They had torn down the emptiness in his life and filled it with something his wealth had never bought: purpose, connection, love, and that, he knew, was worth more than any fortune.